The job posting on Craigslist was for an off-season property manager, which sounded way better than guy who sits alone in a creepy, snowed-in hotel for 5 months. The owner's son, Caleb, assured me the only thing I'd have to worry about was boredom. He failed to mention the locks on the inside of the pantry doors. My name is Alex. I'm a writer, or at least I was. After a brutal round of layoffs at the magazine I worked for, I found myself with a severance package that wouldn't cover 2 months' rent in the city and a half-finished novel that was going nowhere. The Crimson Peak Inn seemed like a godsend. 5 months of guaranteed solitude, a roof over my head, and a decent paycheck to boot. All I had to do was make sure the pipes didn't freeze and the place didn't burn down. Easy enough, right? The drive up was beautiful in that rugged, slightly menacing way that mountain roads are in late autumn. The Rockies clawed at the sky, their peaks already dusted with the first snows of the season. The inn itself was a sprawling, rustic behemoth of dark timber and river stone, perched on a ledge overlooking a valley that seemed to stretch into forever. It was the kind of place you see on postcards, all majestic and serene. But as the season's last light bled out of the sky, the long shadows it cast seemed to cling to the building like a shroud. Caleb was there to greet me. He was a tall, lanky guy in his early 30s with a mess of sandy hair and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. There was a nervous energy about him, a sort of constant fidgeting that made me feel on edge just by being near him. "Alex, welcome to the Grand Tour," he said, his voice a little too loud in the vast, empty lobby. The air inside was cold and smelled of pine cleaner and something else, something old and musty, like damp earth. He walked me through the hotel, pointing out the boiler room, the circuit breakers, the main water shutoff. His commentary was peppered with anecdotes about the hotel's history, but they were all slightly off. "This is the Evergreen Suite," he'd say, gesturing to a room with a massive four-poster bed. "An old mining baron built this place back in the day. A real character. They say his wife just up and vanished one winter. Left a note saying she'd gone back to the city, but folks around here have other ideas." He'd follow this with a short, sharp laugh that sounded more like a bark. The tour ended in the cavernous kitchen. Stainless steel counters gleamed under the fluorescent lights. "And here's the pantry," he said, swinging open a heavy wooden door. "Stocked you up with enough non-perishables to survive the apocalypse. Ah, you know, a bad snowstorm." He winked. It was then that I noticed them. 3 heavy-duty bolt locks mounted on the inside of the door. "What's with the hardware?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Caleb's smile tightened. "Oh, that. Old Mr. Abernathy, the owner. He's a bit of an eccentric. Worries about bears. You know how it is." I didn't. I grew up in Chicago. The only bears I'd ever seen were at the Lincoln Park Zoo. But I needed this job, so I just nodded. "Right. Bears." He handed me a set of keys and a satellite phone. "For emergencies only," he stressed. "Cell service is a myth up here. I'll be up once a week with fresh supplies until the pass is snowed in for the season. After that, you're on your own till spring." He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that was probably meant to be friendly but felt more like a warning. "Try not to get cabin fever, city boy." The first few weeks were exactly what I'd hoped for. The silence was absolute, a thick, comforting blanket that allowed me to finally hear myself think. I wrote for hours every day, the words flowing in a way they hadn't in years. I'd take breaks to walk the deserted hallways, my footsteps echoing in the vast emptiness. I explored every room, every nook and cranny of that old hotel. It was a beautiful place, filled with antiques and faded photographs of people who had long since turned to dust. There was a certain melancholy to it, a sense of forgotten stories that I found inspiring. Caleb's weekly visits were the only interruption. He'd bring fresh meat and produce, along with a stack of old newspapers and a bottle of cheap whiskey. He always had a new story about the hotel, each one a little darker than the last. He told me about the gambler who'd hanged himself in room 217 after losing a high-stakes poker game. He told me about the young couple who'd gotten lost in a blizzard while trying to hike to the nearest town, their frozen bodies not found until the spring thaw. He seemed to relish the telling of these tales, his eyes gleaming with a strange sort of possessive pride. "This place has a history," he'd say, leaning back in his chair, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "It holds onto things. People, too." I brushed it off as local folklore, the kind of spooky stories people in isolated places tell to pass the time. But I'd be lying if I said his words didn't get under my skin. After he'd leave, the silence of the hotel would feel different, heavier, more watchful. The first big snow came in late November. It fell for 3 days straight, a relentless curtain of white that buried the world. When it finally stopped, the landscape was transformed. The jagged peaks were softened, the endless pines bowed under the weight of the snow. It was beautiful, but it was also the end of my connection to the outside world. The pass was officially closed. Caleb's visits stopped. The satellite phone was my only link, a silent black brick on the kitchen counter. That's when I started to hear the noises. At first, it was subtle things. A floorboard creaking on the level above me when I was in the lobby. A faint whisper that might have just been the wind whistling through the eaves. I told myself it was just the old building settling, my mind playing tricks on me in the profound quiet. I was a writer, after all. I had an overactive imagination. But then the noises became more distinct. One night, I was jolted awake by what sounded like furniture being dragged across the floor in the ballroom. I grabbed a heavy flashlight and, my heart pounding, I went to investigate. The ballroom was empty, a cavern of dust motes dancing in the beam of my light. But there were fresh scuff marks on the polished wood floor, leading from the center of the room to a set of double doors that opened onto a snow-choked veranda. A few days later, I found a footprint in the dust on the grand staircase. It was a boot print, much larger than my own, and it was heading up. I checked every room on the second floor, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Nothing. No one. Paranoia started to set in, a cold, creeping dread that I couldn't shake. I started sleeping with a heavy fire poker by my bed. I'd jump at every little sound, my head snapping towards the source, my ears straining to hear. I began to talk to myself, my own voice a comfort in the oppressive silence. I tried to rationalize it. I was alone, in a huge, empty building, cut off from the world. It was a classic recipe for psychological distress. The Shining, but without the ghosts. This was real life, and in real life, the monsters are usually just in your head. The discovery in the pantry changed everything. I was running low on canned soup and went to the walk-in pantry to restock. As I was reaching for a can of clam chowder, my fingers brushed against something etched into the wooden shelving. I shone my flashlight on it. It was a name carved into the wood with what looked like a fingernail dot. Eleanor. Below it, a series of hash marks, like a prisoner keeping track of the days. There were dozens of them. My blood ran cold. I started checking the other shelves. More names. David, Sarah, Michael. And next to each name, a collection of frantic, desperate-looking hash marks. That's when I saw it. Tucked away in the back, behind a stack of dusty preserves, was a small, tattered diary. The cover was faded leather, the pages yellowed and brittle. The first entry was dated 5 years prior. My name is Eleanor Vance. I took a job as the winter caretaker at the Crimson Peak Inn. The owner's son, Caleb, seems nice enough. I sank to the floor, my legs suddenly unable to support me. I read for what felt like hours, my horror growing with every page. Eleanor's story was a mirror of my own. The initial sense of peace and solitude, the unsettling stories from Caleb, the strange noises in the night. But her story went further. She wrote of seeing a man in the hallways, a shadowy figure who would watch her from a distance. She wrote of food going missing from the kitchen, of finding her belongings moved around in her room. Her paranoia escalated into sheer terror. She tried to use the satellite phone, but it was dead. She tried to hike out, but the snow was too deep. She was trapped. The last few entries were almost illegible, the handwriting shaky and panicked. He's in the walls. I can hear him breathing. Caleb knew. He knew he was here. This isn't a job. It's a cage. The final entry was just 2 words. He's here. I dropped the diary as if it had burned me. It all clicked into place. The locks on the inside of the pantry door, Caleb's creepy stories, his possessive attitude about the hotel. He wasn't just the supply guy. He was the gatekeeper. He was luring people here. But why? And then I heard it. A soft, scraping sound coming from the ventilation grate on the far side of the pantry. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The scraping stopped, and then a low, guttural chuckle that seemed to come from all around me. I scrambled out of the pantry, slamming the heavy door and fumbling with the deadbolt. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. I was not alone. This wasn't my imagination. Elena hadn't been crazy. There was someone else in the hotel with me. A predator who had been watching me, toying with me, for weeks. I ran to the kitchen and grabbed the satellite phone. Just as Elena had written, it was dead. No signal. Nothing. Caleb must have disabled it remotely, or given me a dud. The realization that my only lifeline was a useless piece of plastic sent a fresh wave of panic through me. I had to get out. I didn't care about the snow or the cold. I would rather freeze to death on the mountain than stay in this hotel for one more night. I threw on my heaviest coat, grabbed the fire poker and my flashlight, and headed for the front door. It was chained and padlocked from the outside. I tried the back door. Same thing. Every possible exit on the ground floor had been secured from the outside. I was a rat in a trap. A very, very large and ornate trap. I spent the next few hours in a frantic haze, barricading myself in the caretaker's small apartment off the kitchen. I pushed the heavy oak table against the door and wedged a chair under the knob. I knew it wouldn't hold for long against a determined effort, but it was all I could do. The sun began to set, painting the snow-covered peaks in hues of orange and purple. Usually, I found the sunsets here to be breathtakingly beautiful. Now, it just meant the long, dark night was coming, and he would be more active in the dark. As if on cue, the scraping started again. This time, it was coming from the vents in my apartment. A slow, methodical sound. Scrape, scrape, scrape. He was in the crawl spaces, the arteries of the hotel. He knew this place like the back of his hand. He could be anywhere. He could be everywhere. "I know you're in there, city boy," a voice rasped from the vent above my head. It was a dry, whispery voice, like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "Caleb told me you were a writer. Are you writing a story about me?" The voice was followed by that same low chuckle. I didn't answer. I just sat there, clutching the fire poker, my knuckles white. "Don't be shy," the voice continued. The others weren't this quiet. Elena, she was a screamer, real set of lungs on her. A cold primal fear, unlike anything I had ever known, seized me. This was it. This was how I was going to die. A forgotten headline in the spring dot. Missing writer found dead in remote hotel. But then, something shifted inside me. The fear was still there, a cold, hard knot in my stomach, but it was joined by a white-hot surge of anger. I wasn't going to be another name carved into a pantry shelf. I wasn't going to be another one of Caleb's 6 stories. I had to fight back. I had to survive. I spent the night in a state of hypervigilance, my ears attuned to every creak and groan of the old hotel. The scraping would start and stop, sometimes close, sometimes far away. He was toying with me, trying to wear me down. I didn't sleep. I didn't even blink. When the first gray light of dawn broke through the window, I had a plan. It was a desperate, stupid plan, but it was the only one I had. The hotel was a prison, but it was also a weapon, and I was going to use it against him. I knew from Caleb's tour that the hotel had an old, rickety service elevator in the back, the kind with a manual gate. It was used to haul laundry and supplies between floors. Caleb had said it was temperamental, but that it still worked. It was my only chance. My plan was simple: lure him into the elevator shaft. I spent the morning gathering what I needed. A can of lighter fluid from the maintenance closet. A box of matches. A length of rope from the ski rental room. I went to the main lobby and started shouting. "Come on, you bastard! You want me? Come and get me!" My voice echoed in the cavernous space. For a long time, there was only silence. I was about to give up hope when I heard it. A soft thud from the floor above. He was here. He was coming. I ran for the service elevator, my heart hammering against my ribs. I pried open the doors to the shaft on the ground floor. A wave of cold, musty air washed over me. I looked down into the darkness. It was a 3-story drop to the concrete basement floor. I tied the rope to a heavy pipe and lowered myself onto the top of the elevator car, which was thankfully resting at the ground floor. I doused the rope above me with lighter fluid. Then I waited, perched in the darkness like a gargoyle, the fire poker gripped tightly in my hand. I heard his footsteps approaching, slow and deliberate. He wasn't rushing. He was savoring this. He thought he had me cornered. The elevator doors creaked open above me. A figure silhouetted against the dim light of the hallway peered down into the shaft. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and stooped, his face obscured by the shadows. "Clever boy," he rasped, "but not clever enough." He jumped. He landed on the roof of the elevator car with a heavy thud that shook the entire structure. He was faster than I expected. He lunged for me, his hands outstretched like claws. I swung the fire poker with all my might, connecting with the side of his head with a sickening crunch. He staggered back, a low growl rumbling in his chest. He was hurt, but he was far from down. As he came at me again, I scrambled up the rope. I pulled out the box of matches, my fingers fumbling with the flimsy cardboard. The first match fizzled out. The second one did the same. He was climbing the rope now, his grunts of exertion echoing in the narrow shaft. I struck a third match. This time, it corked. I held the flame to the lighter fluid-soaked rope. It went up with a whoosh, a line of fire racing up towards the ceiling. I let go, dropping the few feet back onto the elevator car. The flaming rope snapped, and he fell, a strangled cry escaping his lips as he plunged into the darkness below. I heard a sickening thud, followed by silence. I didn't wait to see if he was dead. I scrambled out of the shaft and ran. I ran back to my apartment, my lungs burning, my body shaking uncontrollably. I barricaded the door again and collapsed onto the floor, sobbing with a mixture of terror and relief. I stayed in that room for 2 days, living on protein bars and melted snow, starting at every sound. The silence from the rest of the hotel was absolute. On the third day, I dared to venture out. I went to the basement, my flashlight beam cutting a nervous path through the gloom. He was there, at the bottom of the elevator shaft, a broken, twisted thing. His face was turned towards me, his eyes wide and staring. Even in death, he looked surprised. I found his nest in the labyrinthine crawl spaces behind the walls. It was a small, claustrophobic space filled with stolen blankets, empty food cans, and a collection of pathetic, heartbreaking trinkets. A locket with a picture of a young woman, a child's worn teddy bear, a silver hairbrush. They were trophies, souvenirs from his victims, from Elena and David and Sarah and all the others. The next few months were a blur of numb survival. I waited for the spring thaw, a prisoner in a silent, snowbound tomb with a dead man in the basement. I didn't write. I barely ate. I just existed, haunted by the ghosts of the Crimson Peak Inn. When the snow finally melted enough for the snowplow to clear the pass, I walked out. I didn't look back. I left everything behind. The police listened to my story with a mixture of disbelief and pity. They found the body, of course, and the names in the pantry, and the diary. Caleb was arrested. He confessed to everything. The man in the walls was his older brother, a diagnosed schizophrenic who had been taken care of by the family for years. When their father bought the hotel, they saw it as the perfect solution. A place to keep him hidden, away from the world. The caretakers were just there to keep him company, to be his playthings. I tried to go back to my old life, but it was gone. The city was too loud, the crowds too suffocating. The silence of my apartment at night was the worst. It was never truly silent. I could always hear the scraping in the walls. I don't know what the point of this story is. A cautionary tale about answering Craigslist ads, maybe. Or a reminder that the most beautiful places can hide the darkest secrets. All I know is that some places hold onto things. And sometimes they hold onto people, too. I left the Crimson Peak Inn, but I don't think a part of me will ever truly escape. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe and give this video a like. We appreciate everyone and can't wait to bring more stories your way.